BioSolveIT, which is called Molecular Fingerprint Screening in Trillion-Size Chemical Spaces. This is where we will showcase to you the infiniSee 5 version, which we called Artemis. In this workshop, we will talk about molecular fingerprints in general, about close analogs, and I will also show you how to operate and the newest features on infiniSee 5. Before we dive into the molecular fingerprints, I need to get everybody on the same train, and therefore I need to talk a little bit about chemical spaces in general. I will keep it very briefly though. As you can see, the chemical spaces are expanding. It's a very popular topic that has gained a huge momentum in the past 5 years, I would say. And the reason is because those spaces contain many compounds, a lot more compounds than enumerated spaces do. In red, we have proprietary spaces, so spaces that belong to a pharmaceutical company, so it's not something you can search in. In orange, we have publicly available spaces, so something that you can just access from your computer at home. And we do have the blue spaces, which are commercial sources for compounds. And as you can see, where's my pointer? As you can see, the approved drugs are close, or at least drugs that have reached the clinical state are in the range of 10 to the power of 5. And once we leave those numbers and approach those 10 millions, 2-digit millions, we see that there are some enumerated spaces, compound lists, where you can select compounds to buy from. And as you can see, once we go into the larger spaces and the larger numbers, you can see that our logo pops up, which means that enumeration has its limits, unfortunately, and we need new approaches to harvest and mine from those huge compound collections to actually use those compounds in our scientific projects. And this is what we this is what we aim to do at BioSolveIT. We want to exceed the limits of enumerated compound libraries by using combinatorial approaches to generate those vast, ultra-large chemical spaces. And the beauty of this approach is that everything you can find within, or the most things you can find without those spaces, is actually something you can access, synthesize, and actually purchase for your projects. For comparison, we have enumerated libraries, and the latest releases are scratching the 10 to the power of 12 numbers, so trillions. But we have sizes which are close to the terabyte or petabyte size. I mean, those are more imaginary numbers. The Sync library, the latest release, the 2022 version, scratches at 37 billion, as far as I can recall. So it's still a long way to go to reach those huge numbers. And as you can see, the spaces you can actually download from our website and that we generate, they do not exceed those megabyte sizes or even gigabyte sizes. So compared, you can see the difference is astonishing. Since I've been talking about the Sync22 database, this was a publication that was actually, it's pretty fresh, it's 2 weeks old, February 15th, published on JCYM by John Irvin. And you can see that this new Sync collections of compounds that you can actually purchase and buy have reached a new a new level. So we are now at the 37 billion size of enumerated compounds. Enumeration, just for everybody, enumeration means that every compound is listed. Every compound has a definite structure, a definite ID to it, and people can look into those endless lists and then select, I want to have this compound. So these compounds do exist, and they were actually taken into this list per hand, or it's in some way translated into a tangible form. But you can see that if you would download 4.5 billion of molecules, it would take you at least 3 months at a computer speed of 1 gigabyte per second download. So maybe not something so convenient. And this is also where the authors comment that this cannot go on forever. So basically, this is important, and I don't think that enumeration will fade away in the closest future. But if we want to go into those huge, vast numbers, we actually have to take a look into how we can actually successfully mine from those unenumerated combinatorial spaces. To give you an idea how we actually set up those spaces, we do it in the same way that everybody would do. We start with building blocks. So these are compounds, and you can see those compounds contain functionalities represented here by building blocks. And what you can do with building blocks, you can actually build something with them. So you combine those building blocks by applying chemical reactions. Here we have an example where we combine an azide with an alkaline chain and create something, namely this triazole, which received a Nobel Prize last year. Further, we can also see the carboxylic acid, which couples to an amine, creating the amide here. And you can also see how the building blocks actually stack and form a new functionality within the structure. And now the beauty of this approach is that we actually do not add up. So this is not a sum that we create, but a multiplication. N to N times M times L. And we get a huge, huge number of compounds resulting from these combinations. We have created a software BioSolveIT for that. It's called Colibri. And basically what it does, you feed your building blocks into it, you feed your reactions into it, and then since Colibri knows how to combine each building block with another, it translates all of those building blocks and reactions into a huge chemical space. So this was a very brief introduction to the chemical space technology that we developed. But now let's take a look into what's about to come. So many of you have heard or used already or still using the F-trees approach. F-trees is our fuzzy matching of molecular features. So we are searching for fuzzy pharmacophore features within those fast chemical spaces and retrieve compounds that are somewhat similar to your query compound. So we just look into something that has a similar arrangement of functional groups, which allows you to perform pretty interesting scaffold hops. In the newest release of infiniSee, we have actually renamed the F-trees approach into a new mode. It's not a new mode per se, but it has a new name to it, a new ring, and it's called Scaffold Hopper. You're all here for the newest feature, and therefore I'm very proud to introduce to you the SpaceLight algorithm that we call the analog hunter mode within infiniSee. And what the analog hunter does, it searches for close analogs with high Tanimoto similarity compared to your query compound. And if you now take a look on the query structure, you can see that we get something very similar, have a very related compound to your query structure with some slight modification in this area. So basically you're looking for something that is just exactly what you're looking for. So a very relevant, related compound to your query molecule, but just a variation of it. Just to make this story complete, we are also working on implementing SpaceMax into infiniSee. SpaceMax is an exact substructure searching. So basically, you would tell this traceback algorithm, hey, I would like to have this particular substructure within my compound. And then it would dive into the vast chemical spaces and retrieve all compounds, as many as you want, with this particular substructure, which is of greatest interest to fragment-based drug discovery. So this is what we are working on to establish to cover all the needs of medicinal chemists and synthesis chemists, or everybody working with drug discovery per se, to provide you with all the tools to retrieve whatever you actually need for a project. With F-trees, you get scaffold hops. With SpaceLight, you get analogs. And with SpaceMax, you get everything that contains a substructure of your interest. The question is about the use case of close analogs. So obviously, analogs are very important for structure-activity relationship exploration. So you have a compound and you're asking yourself, well, what's out there that we can synthesize or purchase to a compound to investigate what features of the compound are actually important for activity or inhibition of the target. The beauty of the screening within those vast chemical spaces is what can be synthesized. basically everything that you find within those chemical spaces is something that you can synthesize by your own, or just request somebody else and pay them for that to synthesize it for yourself. The other question is obviously, what should we not synthesize? So basically, what are the reactions, the building blocks we have at hand? And you want to create also, you can also mine compounds from those chemical spaces, which is couples to the next point. So basically, you can retrieve novel compounds that are accessible from those chemical spaces and use them for subsequent enrichment and analysis. So you can actually dock them. You can tell them, oh, okay, see, I have now this, I don't know, carboxylic acid, which is available in those spaces. I can buy it. Should I do it? But this is a compound you can actually analyze. It's a compound you can buy, then you dock it and you tell, oh no, the carboxylic acid would be a waste of time. Let's not do that. This is also very important for machine learning, AI, and neural networks. I'm having a double here, that doesn't matter. Basically, those compounds are not just made up compounds. They're not kind of like imaginary compounds. This is not something randomly generated, but these are all compounds you can synthesize. And this is something you can feed into your machine learning algorithms to check which one of those will be actually of interest, right? So this is like a source for tangible and accessible compounds. And basically, let's assume you would have a de novo compound designed with your workflows, with your creativity, whatever. And you now have a compound that has the best properties, that has the best docking score. And you ask yourself, well, I could synthesize that, but is there something out there that I could just buy? And the question is, yeah, just look into the space. And the question will be answered if you can buy something that is the compound, exactly the one you're looking for, or maybe just a close analog that may be as good as your design compound. And furthermore, like ideation is the most obvious thing. Just look at the space to get an idea. What can I synthesize? Oh, no, I have not considered like adding this tetradzole into this position. Let's use it for brainstorming, like, right? There's also publication out there, SR by Space, and collaborate that we did with collaboration with the ChemSpace guys and Anamine. So this is something you can just explore everything that is out there based on your query compound and then buy everything. And within 2 weeks, you're more wiser which route you should take to optimize a compound. Now I would like to address molecular fingerprints. So since we're all here to learn a thing or two about molecular fingerprints, I would like to just give you a basic idea and build up on that. And the concept of molecular fingerprints is that every molecule can be represented with a unique identifier based on its structural properties. So we all can see this Lewis structure in front of ourselves, and we all know how this compound looks like. We can see it's a phenyl. We can see the sulfonamide there, so we completely understand what's written there. In other cases, we could use also SMILES codes to see what compound would look like if we just write it out. But it's difficult to compare SMILE strings with other SMILE strings. So this is not a trivial matter per se. But we can do something by namely translating this structure into a long chain of zeros, of O's and ones, so zeros and ones. This is what we would call a binary code. So every molecule can be represented just as an arrangement of zeros and ones, which is convenient because we do not have to save aliphatic like the alphabet, like letters, like SMILES strings, but we can just use ones and zeros, which is a very convenient way for data storage and management. What's even better is that we can actually use those fingerprints to compare two strings to each other. So you can see, oh, see, they have a matching of 80%. So these two compounds are very likely to be similar to each other. Before we dive into the use case applications, we need to learn a little bit about the fingerprints that are already out there. I will start with the ECFP, the extended connectivity fingerprint. What the extended connectivity fingerprint does, it captures the environment, so the structural features and connectivity of atoms within a molecule. So what you do, you start with an atom, and you do it for all atoms at all stages, right? So you do it right now for this carbon here, and now we start with this carbon, and we look with a diameter of 2, like a radius of 1 and a diameter of 2. which atoms, heavy atoms, are actually connected to my investigated atom here. We do it for ECFP2, we do it with a diameter of 2. If we do a second iteration, we can also extend it further to capture more neighboring atoms. Now, in this case, we would have a diameter of 4, which would capture also these aromatic carbons here, and also these aliphatic carbons here. And if we extend it a little bit further, we can also use the ECFP6, a diameter of 6, to capture also these carbon atoms within the aromatic ring and these carbon atoms in the aliphatic ring system. Which is important because you can see I have now here a little bit of a cutoff, because the ECFP6 would not know what this nitrogen contributes to the overall fingerprint. So it's agnostic to it. And again, as I said, you do it for every single atom at every single stage. The ECFP is based on the Morgan algorithm, which calculates unique identifiers for each atom in a molecule, based on its neighboring atoms. The numbers here, the variance, indicate the diameter, as I mentioned, 2, 4, and 6. And the ECFP4 is the most popular one, and is actually the ones people refer to when they talk about the ECSFP fingerprint. It belongs to the best performing fingerprints in digital screening. I have some publications for you if you would like to look it up afterwards. And how it works, basically, let's assume again with our carbon atom for the ECFP2, it would look from this carbon atom and see, I have an oxygen here connected to it with a bond of 2, a double bond. I have an amine here in this area and an alkyne group, another carbon here. Basically, it sees, well, this is an amide, and once it sees this amide, it can translate a 0 to a 1, meaning this one indicates, yep, an amide is present in this position. How it works is basically starting from each atom. Again, this is done for every single atom in each iteration. It looks at the number of, it looks at several parameters, which are the number of neighbors, the valency, the atomic number, atomic mass, charge, and also the number of attached hydrogens. So the first thing it does, and it's very, very initial step, it just looks at every single atom. That's it. Only the atoms, no connectors, no nothing. And then once it has done all of those numbers, it translates all of those numbers into a single number string, which is called the unique identifier. So this carbon would receive this unique identifier, which we continue for another, I don't know how many numbers, 8 numbers or so. Then from there, we actually would start with the ECFP fingerprint per se. Then we would look into the connecting neighbors. So from the perspective of the individual atom, for each, again, it is done for every atom, we calculate again new properties, basically the connections to the other atoms here, here, and here. So everything that we've done here, we do again, but just also for the connected neighbors. And then once we have all those numbers collected, we translate them again into a unique identifier. In the third iteration, if you would like to go into the ECFP4, we do it again. We just extend the neighbors. We look now from an individual perspective of each atom for its neighbors and their neighbors, calculate all of those properties here again, and then get a unique identifier for this atom, this atom, this atom, this atom, and so on and so forth. There's also a little bit of background magic happening just to make it complete, to make the story complete. Duplicates of connectors are removed, the connectivity and properties are described, and once we have everything done, we just translate everything into a unique identifier. We do it every now and then, we do it in each step until we've reached the desired variant number here, so the diameter we want to parameterize itself. So obviously, the bigger you get, the more features you capture, the more of the environment you capture, the more you need to do the calculations. So with an ECFP6, you need to do a lot of more of calculations compared to ECFP4 or compared to ECFP2. So once we have all of our unique identifiers for each atom collected, we convert those identifiers into a binary bit array. So basically, we try to translate them into ones and zeros in a given number, which is usually just a multiplier of 124. So like 2 to the power of, I don't know, whatever. And once we have translated them into those unique identifiers into a string of ones and zeros, we basically get our fingerprint of molecule X. That's it. That's how molecules. That's how molecular fingerprints work. Those are the publications. Since this session will be recorded, I will not go too much into detail. Basically, ECFP belongs to the best, one of the best performing. Again, it's not the best one, but one of the best performing standard fingerprints, and is actually an industrial standard. So take a look at the publications. But this is like your take-home message that ECFP is the most commonly used one in the CAMP community. So if I have lost you in this ones and zeros, just to give you a take-home message, explain to me like I'm 5. ECFP describes a molecule as a sequence of ones and zeros. That's it. It captures functional groups as a total, so it tries to capture the features of a molecule. It's the most used one so far, at least according from what we learned and got communicated from the big pharmaceutical companies. And it can be used to compare molecules, one molecule to another. This is why we decided to include or set the ECFP4 as the default fingerprint in infiniSee 5. So since I've been now just talking about ECFP4, you will ask yourself, well, obviously there are other fingerprints out there. And yes, we actually do need other fingerprints. If we want to do a similarity comparison, so if we want to see which molecules are actually related to my query compound, we have to have some numerical value attached to them to see how closely related those are. To compare those molecules to each other, we need the bit strings for both of them. Now this is a problem. Ultra-large libraries require too much resources to translate every single molecule into a fingerprint. It takes a lot of time, it takes a lot of effort, especially once you dive into those billions and trillions. The second problem is, from the setup of our combinatorial spaces, we have actually zero idea what is inside those spaces. We just know what reactions are inside, we know what compounds, what building blocks are inside, but we have no idea about the products, because we just generate those products once we perform a search, and then we enumerate the search results. But this is the only point where we actually get to touch them for once. In this example, we have now this click chemistry reaction with the phenyl and the thiazole. And you can see that in this reaction, we actually form a new ring system. The problem is this ring system is not present in our chemical spaces. We don't know it because this is generated during the search. So obviously, if we would apply a similarity search on a compound or this compound, it would be very difficult because this is not something we can actually touch. We don't know that this exists within the spaces. This is why we came up with a new fingerprint, namely the CSFP, the connected subgraph fingerprint. What this fingerprint does, it captures the features a little bit differently compared to the ECFP4, but it can actually also index the creation of new ring systems. So since we would generate those spaces, we also add a tag to this molecule inside the fingerprints and tell them, hey, we actually form a new ring system in this position without knowing what the ring system will be. We know how those molecules are created and how they look like, but we don't know which actually will come out of that, except for this new ring system will be created during the research. And it works like this. Since we have now, for the ECFP2, we capture the whole totality of this amide. In the CSFP, we do it a little bit differently because we just compare smaller features. We know that we have a connection from this carbon atom to this carbon atom. We know we have a double bond from this carbon atom to this oxygen. And we also know about the single bond from this carbon to the nitrogen. So basically, we have zero idea about the amide, but we do know that all of those other elements of the amide are actually present and will be created during the search. So it is a fine-grained control of the chemical model which is encoded within those chemical spaces. So we know much more details about the molecules and about the building blocks, but we have zero idea about the functional groups in total, which is completely fine by the end of the day. As of today, we offer 3 different CSFP fingerprints. I won't go too much into detail on each one of those, but this is a fragment-based fingerprint on fine-grained similarity, which is kind of like the standard that we will apply sooner or later. But we also have the possibility to apply topological fingerprints, which are just analogs with similar arrangement of functionalities. So this one is actually pretty cool to, if you would like to have a little bit of more diversity on the substitution patterns like ortho, meta, para, and stuff like that. And here we also have the ICSFP, which is a fingerprint for independent arrangement of functional groups. As of today, we didn't want to overload people with the possibilities of different fingerprints, so they are not part of infiniSee yet, but we plan to add them slowly, little by little, into the software that people can search those spaces with them as well. But if you are eager to use them, you are free to do so with the SpaceLight command line tool. So these fingerprints are all available. You can use them now, just not in the user interface of infiniSee, but you have to rely on the command line tool. This is also very interesting to see just what those fingerprints do. And you can see there are small differences within those fingerprints that allow you to fine-tune your results based on your needs. So if you want to have a little bit more insights into that, we have a lot of tutorials on our YouTube channel that cover exactly this topic. But I don't want to bore you too much and don't want to be too repetitive at this point. And to give you an idea of FCSFP and ECSFP again, as I told you, in this example of this amide, we can see that the single atom features, those both are a carbon atom, they're both the same for this one. Whereas if you now go for the ECFP2, the 2 diameter, we cover also the oxygen, nitrogen, and the carbon here. So basically we have this one representing the amide, and we have 3 features, so it splits into 3 different features to be fine-grained, but they all represent then the individual connections of the carbon atom to the neighbors. So we have more features, but smaller. Again, ECFP, less features, but bigger, and CSFP, smaller features, but more. It becomes even more evident if you now dive into the detailed explanation. This is now just to visually back up what I've told you. Amide, only 1 entry, one bit. And for the CSFP, we have 3 different ones because it's more fine-grained and we need it for those approaches. To summarize things, the extended conductivity fingerprint, ECSFP, circular fingerprints with defined diameters. It also considers charges and hydrogens, but it does not describe a molecule with all of its structural features because sometimes you lose a little bit here and there. For the CSFP though, we generate more and smaller features. We do neglect charges and hydrogens, unfortunately, but by the end of the day, it doesn't matter. But for this, we actually do cover all of those structural features containing up to how many heavy atoms you would like to have. So the question is for you, obviously, what results can I expect from a closed analog search? So this is now a Creel compound, an FDA-approved drug, voltioxetine. And if you would just use this compound as a Creel molecule and put it into infiniSee, here I've used a novel chemical space Galaxy with 12 billion. And this is something that you would find within the spaces. And I would, from my perspective, say, if you would perform a structure-activity relationship study, those are very legitimate structures that you would consider in synthesizing and testing to see what features of this compound are actually important. And the best part, as I mentioned several times already, this is something that you can just buy. You tell the guys from Wuxi Lab Network, I want to have those 6 compounds. They will synthesize them for you, no questions asked, ship them to you at very affordable prices, and you saved some labor for your co-workers and have the compounds in hand. So the question is obviously, what should you consider when you do those close analog searching? The question is always, what do you want to search with? Do you want to use your query compound, which very limits what results you can find, because everything will be very related to your query compound? If you have a very complex part of the structure, you could also consider to just remove it and to see, okay, I don't particularly want the structure because the researchers will try to match this huge part of the query compound to something else, and therefore you lose a lot of relevant chemistry there. So sometimes it could make sense to make it a little bit smaller and investigate what is out there that is comparable to your smallest structure. You can just use the pharmacophore, so the very, very smallest part of the molecule that is actually active, or even use a de novo designed compound and see what is actually out there that can be synthesized or purchased. Once you do your search, you will get close analogs and novel compounds. Cool, but what do you like to do with it? Obviously, anything that I mentioned for the post-processing part, you could just do template docking. I put template in brackets because this is actually very interesting. Since you are looking for close analogs, it would make sense to just use a doc structure you already have at hand to accelerate the subsequent visual screening to see what of those compounds may be of relevance to you. Since you screen vast chemical spaces, it can happen that you will actually get more than few millions of close analogs to your query compound. And to just fasten up your post-processing, you can use the template docking and then dock everything on your query compound to help the algorithm with the initial placement of the fragment and make it faster. You can also just use it for subsequent ligand-based drug discovery. So if you have a pharmacophore model of conformers, go ahead, put all of your close analogs into it and see which actually do satisfy your constraints or your hypothesis. Filtering is always good. So if you have some ideas about toxicology, own filters in your company, ADME models, whatever, apply them. You can also just do molecule superpositioning with ligand-based alignment. Again, machine learning, AI, neural networks, you know the drill, and anything that comes up to your mind can be used for the enriching there. So this is where I actually think I got you all on the same track in regards to molecular fingerprints. And this is also where I will now show you some, oops, I will show you, close up, there you go. I will show you infiniSee 5. So I'm very proud to present this release that will be made available to the public on March 8th, with us by chance the World Women Day. You know the interface of infiniSee 5. What we have added now is a new feature where you can continue with old products or the products you had last loaded in and just keep going from there. But for the educational purposes, I will start a new project. And what you can see here, that some things have changed. Because from now on, the analyzer mode will be the home button for infiniSee 5. And you see we have new icons, and we have merged the local version of F2E search, the scaffold hopper, and the external server into one single icon. So you can do everything you would like to do locally or on a server by just switching between those buttons. But I don't want to go too much into detail on F2Es, but dive into the new analog hunter mode. Once we are inside the new analog hunter mode, infiniSee will ask us what compound we would like to use as a query. I think it would make sense to use something that we are already familiar with and load it in. So this is voltioxetine. You will notice that we do now have 2 updates in a line for infiniSee 5, which will be the new real space update featuring 36 billion molecules, and also the new galaxy update with 12 billion compounds. So an addition of 4 billion novel structures. I will now select the galaxy space because it's just the fastest one, but you can use whatever space you would like to do, would like to have. I will start with only 100 compounds, and then just click on it, and will retrieve my close analogs within seconds. I know. Well, how many seconds were those? 6? So I screened 12 billion compounds for the 100 closest related compounds to my cubic molecule and got a similarity for them as well. So this is a Tanimoto similarity that you can see here. So basically we have the dimethyl thioether group, and for the piperazine we now have an amide. So structures that I've shown you on the previous slide, and you can just click and go through them to check if there's anything of interest to you. And obviously, since you now have the access to many different scaffolds, many different building blocks, you will also realize what compounds can actually be synthesized and retrieved for this query structure. So for follow-up, I think it's just amazing. You can just buy those things. I mean, like, you can save so much time and effort. I love it. Maybe you'll be like, okay, this was pretty fast, but how about 1,000 compounds? Let's go with 1,000 only. Click. Should take not more than 7 seconds. Ta-da. 1,000 close analogs within seconds. I love it. I mean, like, if you go lower, obviously the similarity will drop, but still, I would say this is of high relevance and it's still a close analog to your query compound. Since we can also make it interactive, I mean, use the chat box if you have a smiles string somewhere lying around of your compound of interest, paste it into the chat. We can look up the compound on the fly so you can see that I'm not lying. And those are not just examples I prepared for you. While you type in your favorite smiles code, I will just go with another structure, maybe this one. So again, as you can, for you to see, I'm very transparent. These are just my smile strings. There's no black magic happening. I'm just copying my molecule and pasting it into an infiniSee. This is my molecule. This is an antibiotic drug. Again, I will go with galaxy. Let's see what happens. Again, only a few seconds. And you see, well, this is a close analog. This is just an acylated form of the nitrogen here, of the amine group. Again, I wouldn't say this is a bad result. I mean, we get even cooler substitution patterns like in sulfonamide. So again, you can see very interesting results, and all of them actually accessible. Maybe you would like to have also something covalent. Why not? Use it. Again, those were 1,000 results. Let's go maybe to the bottom so you can see what you expect from those results. I mean, this is relevant. Let's do it. Have like consider it from project. Why not? So it feels like I got a smile string. I'm not allowed to share the name, so I won't do it. What's this one? Yeah, some kinase inhibitor. Maybe you can share the name of the FDA-approved drug as well. Again, let's see what the 1,000 results will be within 7 seconds. That was 8 seconds. I have to complain to my colleagues. Well, what do you think? I think this is pretty similar. Again, this is something you can just buy. I mean, like, it's very interestingly connected. Even in this case, like here and here, obviously you introduce some new functionalities here and there, but in this case, you also reduce the degrees of freedom. So I actually think it's very interesting. And again, if you don't like those results, or just would like to investigate what's still out there, use those results and then do some sort of filtering and enrichment with them subsequently. What else do we have? We have oxybuprokain, sodium channel inhibitor. Let's see what Galaxy will offer us. Again, if you have any thoughts, feel free to share them. So what do we expect here? Again, seems like this building block is not available though, but we get something acetylated again. Interesting. I hope it's big enough so that everybody can see what I'm talking about at least. So you see, those are really close analogs. Maybe let's just go with maybe only 100, so I don't have to export them in such huge numbers to the analyzer mode. Let's try another space. So Galaxy is the fastest one. Maybe I can also show you Camera is also very fast. Camera features how many? Close to 12 billion compounds. Not something I would like to have because it's a little bit too big for my personal taste. But still, those are close analogs. You cannot deny it. Maybe let's dive into our largest chemical space, Explore. 7 trillion compounds. Trillion. This takes a little bit longer. I think it's close to half a minute or so. Now we have a new slice string. I will do it as well subsequently. So as I mentioned before, we have several spaces available. The spaces, the make-on-demand spaces are ChemWire, Galaxy, and RealSpace. So you just approach those guys and tell them, hey, I want to have this compound. They will synthesize it for you, affordable prices, send them over to you, and that's it. And you're out of the game. We also do have the Freedom space by ChemSpace and the Explore space by eMolecules. Those are do-it-yourself spaces. So you can purchase the building blocks and synthesize the compounds on your own, or approach both companies and ask them, hey, do you have anything you're working with together and have good experiences with that could synthesize the compounds for us? And they're more than happy to support you in this regard. But again, it's always a question of, do we do a lot of synthesis in our offices? So will it make sense to do it ourselves, or would it make sense to outsource those efforts to another CRO? Just a little bit more background maybe while you're waiting. So the setup of those spaces, the architecture, the reactions, the building blocks, they're different from each space because obviously every space has its own in-house knowledge, own building blocks, and the way we process those spaces results in different search times. So now this is Explore, and well, the arrangement is a little bit different though, but as I mentioned, you get 100 different results. I mean, it would take the same more or less for 1000. You can go up to 100K, just for your information, in infiniSee. And if you need more compounds, you can use the command line tool SpaceLight to retrieve up to 1 million compounds, 1 million close analogs. And you see, again, 7 trillion searched within half a minute or so, and you get very interesting results. So basically, this is the SpaceLight mode. We also added a few fancy things to the analyzer. So let's just take all of those compounds and transfer them to the analyzer mode. Oops. Unfortunate. Let's restart it. So still you can see we are still in the process of fine-tuning everything so it doesn't crash. A little pity, but it didn't work out well, but this is a good opportunity to use one of those strings that I've got sent over from a person who sent me, like, how many are those? 7 different strings. I just go into the analog hunter. This is the, I don't know which entry it was. Yeah, it looks very interesting. I will go now with G to get fast results. So I don't know if you are satisfied. Basically, we do have some similar compounds. The sulfonamide is not there, but at least the building block is there, which is good. We'll now take all of those results and export them to the analyzer mode. Which also supports the optibium property calculation. So if you have optibium in your company, you can run it alongside infiniSee as well. And what you will see here, that we have now polished our histogram section. So if you would like to have an histogram or molecular weight, you can just calculate everything and select whatever you would like to see, or log P distribution, total polar surface area, number of donors, and so on and so forth. And let's assume you are very interested into compounds with an log P in the range of 3.6 to 4.6. You can now click on this pillar and add it directly to the filter section and filter your results for all of those compounds, which I think is actually pretty nice. The other thing that we added to analyzer mode is actually the reagents. So now you can analyze your infiniSee result based on what building blocks were actually used for the generation of those results. And you can see that this building block is present in all structures, which is no surprise because we try to perform fingerprint similarity search, and this is a very big structure, and since it's included, it will obviously push the similarity higher. And then, but we can see what else was used to generate those compounds. I think which is pretty neat, to be honest. What else do we do? I think this is more or less the most important thing. If you would like to see, or those results are not present in infiniSee, again, go to this table button, the bluish icon, and you can expand which reagents you would like to see within the table, or how many of those. Okay, this was basically the analog hunter in infiniSee. Again, if you would like to use other fingerprints or automate it in your workflows, you can always use the command line tool of SpaceLight as well. So since time has progressed, I will just give you a quick overview of what the fingerprints can do. This was an internal validation to see how well our fingerprints do perform. We've taken the first iteration of the explore space with only 2 trillion molecules, fed it to our algorithms with 2,936 FDA-approved drugs, and looked what is actually inside those spaces that is the exact match for the FDA-approved drugs. And we did with F3, SpaceLight, and SpaceMax and generated 100 research for each. Then with SpaceLight, we tried to compare the performance of fingerprint algorithms, and we saw that ECFP4 was the fastest one, not the fastest one, but performed pretty well. It analyzed 153 hits identical to the query molecule, so it was able to retrieve exactly the compound that is within the space. And one of those 9 further compounds had also similarity of 1, but were not exactly the same. So it's kind of like small features like E and cis and trans isomers and stuff like that. So basically not very important, but still it was not the identical molecule per se. We did also the same thing with the CSFP algorithm, and we saw that we're actually able to retrieve even more identical molecules. As I mentioned to you, the ECSFP4 fingerprint is pretty good, but it's not designed for the efficient search of our combinatorial fragment spaces. So in the closest future, when we will also include the CSFP4 fingerprint, you will be able to perform more efficient searching within those spaces. But again, for the first initiation, we decided to go with a standard fingerprint so that people can use something they are aware of and can use every now and then. So this is something that people do know, and this is something that we would like people to know in the future at least. Interestingly, FTs and SpaceLight were able to find 3 more molecules. So basically 212 FDA-approved drugs are within the explore space. That's 100% sure. But those are not fingerprints. And what is also interesting, that FTs did find a lot of molecules with a similarity of 1 that are not identical to our query molecule, which is basically not a surprise for us because F-trees is agnostic to stereochemistry as well as the arrangement of heavy atom positions or functional groups. So it does not know if the nitrogen is in position 1 or 2 within a heterocycle, and obviously it does not know if the functional group is meta or auto positioned. This is kind of like a flaw of F-trees, if you would see it that way, but this is what we actually would like to have because this is what increases the fuzzy Fabakov4 searching capabilities of F-trees there. So for the future, be prepared because the CSFP4 fingerprint is able to retrieve a lot of very important molecules out of the space and will be the standard fingerprint or the best performing fingerprint for chemical spaces in general in the future. To give you an idea why CSFP or CSFP fingerprints will become the standard for our spaces, this is now the CSFP fingerprint for this compound, and we calculate all of those features depending on the variant. In this case, variant 4, so it's not circular, but it's linear. And this is everything that we would calculate for this compound. Unfortunately, we cannot calculate compositions like this of the amide. So you can see amide. So everything that is hidden in this connection is something we do not cover because we do not know if this will actually be present in our final compound. This is not something we can enumerate because this is like just the blind side of the fingerprint and the nature of the chemical spaces because we don't know how the results do look like. And from those 39 features, we lose 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So 8 out of 39 is not something that we can cover with this fingerprint. Whereas for the ECFP4, we can see that out of the 26 features, we would lose 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 6 out of 26 is a huge thing because these are also the most important ones. And this also explains actually why the ECFP4 fingerprint is outperformed by the CSFP4. So CSFP4 is better for our spaces, at least compared to ECFP4. So finally, this is like the take-home message for you. ECFP4 was able to identify 72 of the identical compounds within the spaces. We know that 212 are inside the spaces, and we were able to identify 72 of them. Whereas for the FCSFP4, we were able to identify 99% of those compounds. We do find very similar molecules with rather low similarities, like this is a huge part. The similarities are low, the numerical values, whereas we find similar molecules with high similarities, so the numerical number is much, much higher in the case of FCSFP4. And finally, this is like my take-home message for you. I recommend, if you use SpaceLight as a command line tool, I recommend to use the FCSFP4 for the chemical space searches.